To those people in my audience who may not be familiar with who you are, could you put a few words on yourself and what you're doing and so forth?
Yeah, so my name is Baldur Bjarnason, or if you're Icelandic, Baldur Bjarnason. I don't mind either pronunciation. I've been involved in tech for since the mid to late 90s when I made my first website, and been working as a both as a software developer, as a writer, and in various as a researcher in various ways over the intervening years. At the moment, I'm working sort of mixed capacity as still working as a developer, but also continue with the media production side of my tech empire, including a YouTube channel which uses my name, so no complicated branding there. And most of when it comes to the topics I cover in tech, I try to mix. I have a background, an academic background that's very research heavy. So I try to combine my practical technical knowledge and understanding of the technology with an emphasis on going deep on the research and um, putting together overviews of the academic side of the topic as well. So I try to contextualize the technical with the research that has surrounded it. So, and that's basically what I try to convey in my newsletter and in the YouTube channel. That sometimes you to understand, sometimes technology can get wrapped up in terminology and jargon, um, and then the academic research can get wrapped up in a separate layer of terminology and jargon. And what I'd like to try to do is unpack both and present them in a way that people might understand that might not necessarily be overly technical or academic. So trying to appeal to a broader audience than just the tech crowd. Um, we'll see how it goes.
And I know that you have been writing online for approximately 25 years, a bit
Yeah,
more.
pretty much.
And it's just very recently that you decided to make the jump into YouTube. I think you had a very interesting background for your reason why you wanted to go in the video direction, so to speak. Could you tell our audience what your motivation was to start your YouTube channel?
Well, it's sort of the main motivation was came from a realization that the modern discourse, that how people get to discover new topics, engage with arguments, and find information today has, in my mind, shifted completely over to video. And not just like a single platform like TV. It's YouTube, it's streamers, it's TikTok, it's even the videos you see on Blue Sky, which is otherwise a text-based medium. They added video, and it's probably one of the fastest growing part of the platform. And I came to this I came to I'd always considered text to be my primary medium, even though I have some background in video, but that background dates back 25 years. So it's some of it's was quite outdated. But I over the holidays, I reread Neil Postman's "Amusing Ourselves to Death," which is a book he wrote in the 80s about the transition from a primarily reading oriented and literate society to the showmanship-oriented video society or TV society, and his focus was on cable TV, the massive growth in video then, and he was making this observation at the start of this transition. And now reading that book now, where we're pretty much at the end of the transition, we're like after it's done, and I'm looking around and seeing that. Even the people who read are discovering their books through book talk, through TikTok. Even the people who love newsletters are, primarily their browsing is primarily on platforms like YouTube and TikTok. That's where they discover new voices. They don't click from link to link in browsers anymore. So I came to the conclusion that if I wanted people to discover my writing, like the newsletter or the books I've written, I would have to start to get involved in video and doing a bit of video production myself. And I'm on my second or third video at the moment, so it's still early days in the learning curve. But it's kind of fun. It's different in an interesting way. But it's like there's no point in being in denial about how society is changing anymore. You kind of have to just face the facts.
Does that mean that you think people will stop reading?
Well, certain kinds of reading has already stopped. Like it used to be the norm that anything that involved information or training was primarily done through text, like 25, 30 years ago. And it's been sort of over time diminished. Like, for example, when I first started to get involved with, as a hobby, with photography. I mean, that's why I have all the photographic paraphernalia behind me, is because that's one of my major hobbies. When I first started, as a teenager, all of the information that was available about anything from how to use a camera to how to frame your photographs, how to develop film. All of that was the only way I could discover information about any of these things was through text, through books, through articles. But today, you wouldn't be you'd be hard pressed to actually find useful information about photography in text. It's all in video. There's already been a wholesale shift in certain genres of nonfiction from text to video. And I think that for quite a bit of nonfiction, that transition is going to continue. And I wouldn't be surprised if text ended up primarily being relegated to topics that text is much, much better at than video. Like narrative fiction might end up being a niche appeal, but it does things and accomplish things that can't be done easily through video. To tell a story that's grand and imaginative in narrative text only takes a single person. To do the same takes millions and a production team in video. So there's always going to be text, but I think we're going to continue to see more of it shift over to video. And one of the last remaining roles of text has been to be kind of the voice of authority. The way that Neil Postman described it as text has an epistemology of exposition, as in you lay out the argument in text, and that creates the credence, the sort of perception of meaning in the reader, whereas video has an epistemology of showmanship. What is more interesting, better performed, that creates the impression of truth in video. So because text still has that credibility that comes from sharing a forum with legal language, with academia. One of the risks of AI and large language models is that they let you automatically generate text that shares the aesthetics of authority, or of the language of authority. And it lets you create the impression of meaning without having any of the actual exposition or argument behind it. So you can see that this is happening already in terms of search engine results and how people accept the argument of ChatGPT as the truth, because ChatGPT is using the epistemology of exposition. It's recreating and automating the modes that we associate with authority without actually having any underlying authority. It's just a non-deterministic text synthesis engine, but it looks like authority. And to a lot of people, they don't really have the training to differentiate between something that has the surface syntax of authority and something that has actual authority. And that's one of the sort of, in my mind, the big threats from large language models at the moment. It's very worrying.
Hmm. But you've observed the digital transformations for a bit more than 25 years. So you've seen the whole process from the early weblogs to YouTube and so forth, now up until AI models that are becoming more and more impressive by the week. So you have this advantage of you've been observing the space for many years. You might be the right person to ask, if we look 2 years into the future, do you think there's some patterns that will continue? Like where do you see all of this going in the near-term future?
Well, the first thing that people need to bear in mind is that there is no early adopter, there is no first mover advantage when it comes to tech and tech companies. The first companies to adopt and create websites were not the ones that dominated e-commerce. And Amazon was not the first e-commerce website. The first social media website was not the company that ended up dominating social media. Only Russians use LiveJournal today, and LiveJournal wasn't even the first website. Facebook isn't even the second mover. It's like the third or fourth or fifth mover in social media. Adopting AI and large language models today, this is the first genuine generation of chatbots that have do this plausible performance of dialogue and text. Adopting this tech in your business today is just incredibly risky, because you're almost certain to be tying yourself with something that will be legacy technology, like incredibly outdated legacy technology, once the second generation comes through. Once the generation comes through that people understand better, that has more safeguards built in. This is the flawed first version that nobody should be touching. And 2, 3, 4 years down the line, what I expect to see is that the companies that went all in on this first generation of large language models, because the iterations of large language models that OpenAI and Google and Facebook have been working on at the moment, they're all fundamentally the same technology. There is no revolutionary change or like functional systemic change. It's just incremental improvements on the same model. So it's all effectively the first revolution, so to speak. And I think it's just, we're going to see that seeing so many companies go all in on this technology this early without waiting for the other shoe to drop, the second system, it's going to turn out to be a mistake. It's going to be a very, very costly mistake for most of the economy because these systems are non-deterministic. They are incredibly unreliable, and they're kind of like I'd like to call them the kryptonite for management, because the whole point of management is to reduce variability in the systems and processes of a business. These increase it. They are incredibly volatile systems that where there are no technical methods of reliably limiting the volatility and variability of these systems. Every single safeguard we add to them just moves the volatility somewhere else, and usually hides it so that it'll hit you where you can't expect it. So I expect us to have to do a lot of repair work, and it'll be very hard because they're firing all the developers today that have experience that could be doing the repair work, and they are going to be moving to other industries. They're going to be changing careers because there are no jobs for them at the moment. So 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we're going to have a lot of broken software, a lot of really businesses in a lot of really serious trouble, and a complete and utter shortage of developers with the experience and skill sets to solve them. So, but maybe we're going to get lucky, and the US administration will end the world through global warfare in the meantime, so we don't have to solve the software stack. But if we're assuming that we're still going to have a working civilization 3, 4 years down the line, then there's going to be a lot of broken stuff that needs to be fixed. And I don't see anybody thinking about preserving the capabilities we need to do that repair work, unfortunately. So I'm a bit pessimistic.
I think you're so right about what you're saying. You're so right. And at the same time, for business leaders and even politicians, there's so much hype around AI. I feel like they have almost no choice but to adopt it because there's so much commercial pressure, both from top and from bottom. How should the business leaders, for instance, respond to this demand for AI that is all over right now?
I mean, they are in one of those classic. There's a term from psychology called the double bind, where you're in a situation where nothing you do is going to be good. Whatever decision you make is going to be a bad one. You're bound in either way you choose, and because modern businesses are so beholden to the stock market, which is in itself so detached from actual business outcomes, they are in a double bind where do they serve the stock market that will reward them for playing to the myths and trends and the fashion fads that are percolating among these certain societies and communities that dominate investment, or do they cater to the actual business realities and the actual concrete results of that's needed from management? And they because these two are not aligned. They haven't been aligned for a long time. They're like business lead, management theorists back in the 80s were already then pointing out that this short-term next quarter cater to the stock market trend was threatening to harm US-based companies. And you've seen this play out in the fact that US companies who've been hit the hardest by this double bind have essentially divested themselves of pretty much any domestic resource and domestic infrastructure that they could use to build or make products. And they've become entirely dependent on foreign infrastructure, like in China, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, or even Europe, when it comes to making actual new products. And the same risks, we're seeing the same risks play out in terms of software companies, that they need to cater to the stock market, but catering to the stock market is sacrificing their future. So you have to choose. You have to take one hit or the other. And because business leaders are paid with stock options, they almost always are going to choose the selfish interest of sacrificing their company to play to the stock market, to appeal to investors. It's the right thing to do for them, and it's the right thing to do for the people who are playing the sort of short-term gambling that is the stock market. But it's the wrong decision to make for the company itself. If you're looking at the company for on a 1, 2, 3, or 4 year time horizon, but none of the incentives that you have in like the business world today cater to the long term view, and you can only get that through regulation, basically regulating stock options. Because once you take the financial incentive away from the business leaders, then they will feel more free to bet on the long term rather than the short term, because like it is entirely rational for a business leader to think the stock market wants this, that will benefit my own portfolio. It might not play out well for the company, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad, so they're going to go with the short term. But it takes a special kind of business leader to sacrifice their own financial interest and fight the stock market to build up a company they believe in. And I think those businesses are just rare. I don't think we find very many of them at the moment. I mean, Warren Buffett is one example who has always taken the long-term view, but he is like incredibly rich, so he can afford to play the long term. He can afford to sacrifice short-term plays in terms of long-term plays. Most businesses aren't really in that position, and it takes a special kind of personality to ignore those incentives. So the answer is basically, I don't know. It's a hard question.
It is. It is. I like the hard questions, and I'm going to ask you another one. If you are a newly graduated software engineer or perhaps a data scientist, what do you think would be a meaningful career path to pursue?
Oh,
You have
that's
like
a
big tech
hard one.
companies, like they're waving with very big paychecks, and you know what? How can you respond to the current job market?
So, I mean, this is actually something I've been thinking about a lot. Although, from my perspective, as a senior who's used to having senior roles or lead roles, but I've also been thinking about this from a graduate perspective, and it's a tough one, because it's clear that big tech companies are. I mean, was clear before the AI bubble started. Big tech companies are very dysfunctional. Um, they wouldn't have overhired to the extent that they did if they were properly managed. It's like just purely looking outside in on the numbers of their spending, their hiring, their reaction to COVID. These are manifestly badly run companies. They're not. None of their decisions make sense in terms of overall business strategy. They only make sense if they are monopolies or oligopolies that can afford to make decisions that completely contravene market forces. As in, these companies behave as if they do not have to sell to the market that the market belongs to them. That's the only explanation for their outside behavior. And once you're in that position, they become very risky employers for a new graduate for a number of reasons. The first one being they have an unusual, especially now when they're laying off, they have an unusually strong bargaining position in terms of employment. I expect pay for tech, for developers in tech companies to sharply decline, or at least decline to well below the rate of inflation, because they don't care about employees, and also their hiring processes are extremely dysfunctional. They're not following any of the anything. The hiring practices for big tech companies don't resemble anything like good practices that come out of research or academia or from earlier practice in other companies. They are extremely strange and esoteric. They're like a labyrinth that you need to maneuver. So it's very hard to get employed with them. The pay is likely to fall, and there's no job security. They are laying off like 5, 10, 15% of their staff every year, using metrics that are extremely dubious to decide who to lay off. So whatever you decide, I'd say that it might not be worth the effort to try, if you're a new graduate, to try and get employed with a big tech company. That there's a very, very good chance that you would have to spend a lot of time and effort getting the job and then lose it several months later. And if, for example, the AI stock bubble pops anywhere in the meantime, your stock options might end up being basically worthless. So I'd say try to focus on languages and technology as a software developer that are more resistant to, for example, automation, whether that automation comes from AI or other technology. So basically avoid JavaScript and Python, which have it's both the language itself lends itself to certain aspects of it lend itself to large automation using large language models, but also those are the largest collections of code that are in the trading data set. So most code bases, most co-pilots tend to perform marginally better for them than others, which means that employers are more likely to disregard the risks that come with using those co-pilots to basically downsize employment. So my guess, try to focus on things like low-level languages like Rust or Zig, and focus on getting work in companies that are working close to the metal, so to speak, like embedded software, things that companies that simply cannot take the risk of delivering dysfunctional software. But like most web apps, I keep running into web apps that just don't work on any of my devices. So most companies, software like web app development companies, there is no cost to them for delivering blatantly non-functional apps. And that creates a dynamic that it's basically, if there's no downside to deliver an app that doesn't work, then there's no downside in replacing the developer with a large language model. But if you work for a software company where the downside to a non-working app is that payments might not go through for 10,000 people, or the airplane might crash into the ground. They're not going to replace you with a large language model. So basically, focus that would be my recommendation. Focus on smaller companies that work closer to the metal, embedded systems that can't afford to fail, and just work on proper software development practices that focus on code correctness over the popular and the trendy. That's still going to be a much smaller job market than what we have today. The job market for a software developer is going to shrink. I think that's baked in to the trends that we see today. But I think choosing that approach would maximize your chances in the long run. The odds aren't good though. But I don't think the odds are good for pretty much any job market at the moment anyway. So it's all bad.
Yes, some of the AI leaders really have a fetish for removing people with automation.
Yes.
And I think there's a parallel here between the IT industry and the legal industry, because junior developers as well as junior lawyers are especially exposed to automation from AI. How do you think of that risk for like young employers who want to get a good start on the job market, but the employers can use large language models to do many of their tasks, so they might prefer to use AI instead of human labor? What do you think of that?
Well, there's a parallel here in that. Well, one example, a friend of mine, Sue Charman Anderson, who has worked a lot in volunteer work with increasing the participation of women in STEM, in the STEM fields. One of the examples that she tends to use is were the cutbacks that were made, I think something like 20 years ago, in among companies that employ geologists in STEM in the UK, where they stopped hiring junior geologists. The people doing the initial work, that was usually quite rote and repetitive. What happened in those fields is that 10 years later, when those companies had a turnaround, and certainly the industry was seeing many more opportunities for growth, there weren't any senior people to hire. There weren't any experienced people to hire because they'd stopped hiring the junior people. So the industry, the companies that could have been training junior employees from the start couldn't grow. They couldn't grasp the opportunities that they saw, because the industry as a whole hadn't trained up the people with the necessary experience over those 10 years. So the risk for the companies is that 10 years down the line, when interesting things might happen and growth might return, they will start to see difficulties hiring senior people, because you don't get new senior people to replace the ones that retire unless you hire and train up junior people. So the companies are shooting themselves in the foot doing this, because you're always going to need the senior people in the long run. But I don't know what like new employees or junior people in the industry can do to counteract this. This is because they're not the ones that are at fault. They're the ones that are coming into the field with enthusiasm, with an interest in learning and a willingness to do the dull work that is usually what a new employee is faced with. They're willing to do the work, but the companies are not willing to train up the people that they're going to themselves need in the long run. And I don't know what I can say to change the minds of the employers, other than, you're going to need these people. But when somebody comes in with enough passion to want to do, because I imagine, I don't know what it's like to be entry level in the legal industry, but I imagine there's a lot of rote and repetitive and boring work that's involved, and the having the enough enthusiasm and interest in the field to be willing to do that hard work and engage with things that might bore you stiff, but you're still willing to persevere because you have a passion for what you're doing. Those are just incredibly valuable people. You want to preserve that interest, that passion and enthusiasm for the field, because that's what keeps the industry alive. And to the employees who might be facing disinterested employers, I mean, try and keep up the interest and enthusiasm. That's your passion is your strength. That's something that no AI, no large language model will ever replicate. Is that like genuine enthusiasm and curiosity about a field? That is your strength. It's also the biggest asset for the employer, but I don't know whether they'll spot that. I hope they do, because if they do, it will benefit them in the long run. Building up this sort of industry in the long run, it's good for everybody involved, and I hope companies realize this before it's too late.
Hmm. Here towards the end of our talk, I would like to take it up to a very high level and look at the United States versus Europe. Um, you have a very critical view of AI, and it's a view I share with you. There's a lot of hype around AI as technology. Many people claim that AI can become super intelligent in like 5 to 10 years. And this hype is mainly coming from the United States. There are not many Europeans. Some Europeans are, affected by some of the so-called thought leaders in the US. But I think there are very few Europeans who originally believe so strongly in the prospects of AGI and superintelligence. So if we take at like the people at the European Union level, how should they respond to all this hype from AI? Because whether we like it or not, we'll have to take AI seriously and we'll have to adopt it to some extent. At the same time, we might not want to go completely insane with the investments and throw in like trillions of dollars. How should we think of AI as technology on this level?
Well, the way I like to think about it is that machine learning, if we like step back and look at the broader field of machine learning, that is quite possibly the most valuable field in software development today. AI, if we narrow it down to AI, that's an ideology. There is no the distinction between machine learning and AI is purely marketing. The machine learning is about using statistical methods over large collections of data to automate decision making and processing and software development as applied to similar kinds of data as is found in the training dataset. AI is an ideological pursuit of something that is completely unproven. Like there is no scientific evidence that supports the idea that software can ever attain AGI. There is absolutely no reason to believe that. This is just a statement of faith. There, like that, the statements made by companies like OpenAI or Google's sort of AI department or teams on AGI are not based on any sort of understanding on neurology or brains or intelligence. Even Microsoft, when they used the definition of intelligence that they used for their research work was sourced from pseudoscience, from racist pseudoscience with absolutely no basis in biology or scientific research. So machine learning is great. It is statistical. It has a coherent theory as to what it's trying to do. It is focused on replicating patterns from a data set in new examples of data that are similar to the data set. It's going to always be useful for things like processing images, processing video, audio, certain kinds of language processing. But there is no intelligence there, not a single shred of it. The intelligence there is entirely performative. It is you're bringing the intelligence into any interaction you make with AI. The mind that you're witnessing through your interaction, through the text that you engage with in a chatbot, comes from you. You are the one that is making it intelligence. There is no underlying intelligence there, and there never will be. Not using this technology that they're using it today. There is absolutely no path forward for large language models to genuine intelligence. And I'm not the only one saying this. Like Gary Marcus, who is a pro-AI, lifelong AI researcher who has dedicated his life to studying AGI, has repeatedly stated that there is no path from large language models to AGI. This is science fiction, and it's extremely risky to bet your policies, your future decisions on how you want to legislate technology, legislate markets on a science fiction concept that is completely unproven. By all means, support machine learning. By all means, put together frameworks that help companies legally put together large data sets to work with, to create new models that can be used to make software. But the idea of genuine general intelligence it's faith. It's not anything that resembles a coherent policy or a coherent strategy for a tech company. And these, like the people behind, like in OpenAI, their associations with ideological movements, there is a strong reason to believe that these are, from their perspective, religious arguments, that they believe in the singularity, that they believe in similar ideological movements that have a closer resemblance to religion than they do to any coherent scientific concept. So there are two things going on there. One is solid, coherent machine learning technology, build on that. The other is faith. And the only sensible thing for European governments is to not engage in religious arguments, which is what AI is, and just focus on the policy and focus on the concrete technology. Participating in religious in the religious warfare that is taking place in the States is just risky. I do not recommend it.
With those words, I think that's a great way to wrap up the conversation. So I want to say thank you very much for your time, and I hope you'll appear in more podcasts. I think your insights are very solid, and it's good to hear some sense in all of this, crazy internet world.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Great. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Futuristic Lawyer podcast.